All righty, let's get started then. Howdy, neighbor. Welcome. Welcome to the Yamhill County, Oregon Small Woodlands Association Neighbor to Neighbor virtual tour. This is our second virtual tour this year. I can imagine that you understand why these tours have gone from an in-person tour on the tree farmer's land to now a digital format. So I won't go too far into that. Before we get started, I would like to introduce myself and the Oregon Small Woodlands Association. My name is Jeremy Felty. I'm the forester for the Oregon Small Woodlands Association, as well as the Oregon Tree Farm System, which is our partner. So OSWA, OSWA, and OTFS. Today, we are going to be taking a look at LeLand Payne's tree farm, as well as his family, and meeting with some friends of his, as well as his partners in his community, in his management plan, and just with projects on his property. Before we get even further into it, I've got some rules and stuff to go over. So the format we will follow is I will talk briefly before each video, introducing who will be in the video, and then we'll play the video, which you will be able to see on Zoom. And afterwards, after the whole thing is over, you will also receive a link so you can watch it again or send to your friends. While the videos are ongoing, please feel free to use the question and answer chat box to post questions that you might have for the speakers. Almost every speaker that is recorded in the videos will be here today to answer those questions that you might have as if we were there on the land. So feel free to type your questions up as you think of them. No delay. Let's see, what else do I got here? If there are any problems or you have issues with the video, please let us know in the chat box. This will be recorded, so if something happens, you will be able to rewatch the whole thing with the questions and answers, or like I said before, watch the videos separately. And I'd also like to note that if you've used Zoom before, maybe this isn't the same format that you've seen. At this time, only the 10 people you can see the names of have the ability to speak or show video. With that, I'd like to introduce the Executive Director of the Oregon Small Woodlands Association, Jim James. You there, Jim?
Got it. Here I go. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jim James. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Small Woodlands Association. We've invited members and non-members to this event. And so, because I believe there are some non-members participating, I'd like to just briefly mention who the Oregon Small Woodlands Association is. We're a 501c5 membership trade association. We were founded in 1960, and we're the recognized leader of family forest owner issues. We have 14 active chapters scattered throughout the state, and we have a professional staff in Salem. The mission of OSWA focuses on three primary topics: forestry education, state representation, and local affiliation through our chapter. We represent family woodland owners at the Capitol and at state agencies. But today's Neighbor to Neighbor tour is going to focus on forestry education. As Jeremy mentioned, traditionally, OSWA would have 6 or more of these face-to-face tours. COVID-19 has delayed that opportunity in 2020. And typically we would meet on a member's property, have experts on a variety of topics, talk about issues of interest. Today, we're going to do the same thing, except it's going to be through video. And so today you will meet LeLand Payne and his daughter, Nicole Wood. LeLand is a 3rd-generation owner of 111 acres in Yamhill County, west of Yamhill. He was selected as OSWA Yamhill County's chapter Outstanding Tree Farmer of the Year in 2020, and he will compete with 8 other county Outstanding Tree Farmers of the Year for the state Outstanding Tree Farmer of the Year at an event next July in Springfield, the Oregon Family Woodland Owners Convention. He's going to compete with those, and I think he has an excellent chance of being the outstanding tree farmer of the year for the entire state. Before we start the program, I would like to also mention who the partners and sponsors are. First of all, LeLand Payne, Nicole Wood, and OSWA member Dan Upton. Special thanks to you for this program, and also the Yamhill County chapter for your support. There's members of the Partnership for Forestry Education, Oregon Forest Resource Institute, OSU Extension, the Oregon Tree Farm System, the Oregon Department of Forestry, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Greater Yamhill Watershed Council. Also have special thanks to the Weyerhaeuser Company, Laughlin Logging, and the Sustainable Forestry Initiative Implementation Committee. Also, I'd like to thank Pat McAlbry of Sight and Sound Services, who was a videographer for these videos. And at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce LeLand and Nicole in a short video.
LeLand Payne on the homestead in Yamhill. Just about 100 acres, a little over 100 acres. It's about 11.5 miles west of Yamhill, or Clark, and either one of them. Part of it is my grandparents homesteaded. Part of it is what Dad had.
Well, I'm the daughter, Nicole Wood, the youngest of his girls. Grew up on this property also, and my sister currently lives on here with Dad. The property was forested when it was first in the family, but it was logged, and then it was turned into pasture land, and then it reseeded naturally. His grandmother owned it, and then his mother inherited it, and then Dad inherited part of it, and his siblings got some of it, but he purchased some of his siblings' inherited land, so he's got a good section of the inherited property.
Well, that's my main objective at the end.
The main objective is to pass it on to your family?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both the kids.
Mm-hmm.
They'd probably pass it on to my grandkids someday.
That's the hope and the dreams.
But if they work it right, they can live on it for a long time if they have to.
Definitely has created a security network for his family. As part of our management plan, we would like to improve the culvert situation on our property, and so we called ODF, Oregon Department of Forestry, and our stewardship forester, Brent O'Neill, came out and looked at those culverts with us to make sure that they were truly needing to be replaced, and he concurred that it was time because they are fish-bearing streams. We wanted to see if there was anybody that had grants, or how do people replace culverts on their property that at this massive size, because we have a 4-foot culvert in there now. We thought we were just going to have to move it to a 6-foot, but we found out it's going to be a 9-foot. So we didn't have the financial funds liquid, so Dad chose a section of the property to log so he could raise the funds for specifically the culverts. For our management plan, we did have our consulting forester, Dan Upton. He helped us because it was our very first management plan, and Dad is creating the management plan. He was willing to do that because it's more for succession planning than really what he needs to understand, because he knows his property inside and out. But as kids, we need guidance.
Becoming certified forestry has helped us a little bit on market our wood.
Yeah, and it's a recognition of Dad knowing that he wants this land to be sustainable. I guess others understand that we want a sustainable forest. We want to keep it in forestry, and we want to keep wildlife habitat and our streams in good condition. Yeah, that's our highest priority, is the fish streams. We have a diverse wildlife here on the property, and it's very welcoming for wildlife. I just find it unusual that somebody has been born and raised on the same property and has transitioned it into this beautiful forest that he has. It's just amazing. And the love and tenderness and care just oozes out as he's walking through his forest, assessing everything. You can just see his mind turning in all the things of greatness and then worrisome and things that he's got to think about. So it's just wonderful.
Wasn't that great? All right, now I'd like to ask LeLand Payne and Nicole to turn their camera on, and you can see them here live, and maybe you already have some questions based off that short snippet. That video was developed because of their LeLand's status as Tree Farmer of the Year for Yamhill County last year.
We want to take a moment to thank everybody that came out to watch this presentation this morning. It's just a wonderful celebration for my father, LeLand, and we just appreciate all the professionals that are on the panel that are helping this along.
Okay, well, let's, maybe people will have more questions once we jump into the next video. So, oh, here we go. Eldon McMurray says, outstanding effort. How can we contribute to the Culvert Fund? Do you have Venmo?
I don't know if I have an answer for that. We've covered the cost already. And Weyerhaeuser really did a lot of cost sharing with my father because they used one of the roads, but they were amazing and provided the engineering for that large culvert that was just going to be from the 4 foot to the 9.5 foot. So, and then Luke Westfall provided a lot of leadership and guidance for us from the Greater Yamhill Watershed Council. And there was a grant given to Dad then, but due to COVID, it was frozen for right now. So it will be there for somebody else that needs a grant money for the future. But thanks, Eldon. That's, yeah.
Outstanding. Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, and I think that question, you'll kind of get more of an answer further on throughout the day as we get into the other videos. You'll get to meet some of the partners that were involved in the project, and that culvert and the logging that resulted because of it is all part of LeLand's plan, his management plan for his property. Oh, looks like I got another question. Hi, family. This is from Judy, Bishop Pink. How many culverts do you have, or was it the only one that needed replacing?
Yeah, there were 3 culverts, and all 3 were replaced. And LeLand Logging took on that project amazingly. Weyerhaeuser walked us through it, and then of course, Fish and Wildlife were out there helping us collect the fish and secure them for safety. And Brent O'Neill from ODF. I mean, everybody participated. All our professionals were out there and excited to help us. That's what was so neat about it. Everybody was thrilled to come out to the property and help us understand what's correct and what we need to do for the standards of today. Which is what Dad wants to do, right, Dad? Standards of today.
Great. And one more, I think, for now, and this might be answered later, from Chris Erickson. How did you go about identifying a logger for the culvert harvest? That you need a logger only every few years, that would mean you don't have an ongoing relationship?
Oh. Okay.
This might be...
Dad is from the logging industry. So Dad is a professional logger from age 12, actually, if you really want to get down to it. And so he has a lot of relationships with them. But if our consulting forester, Dan Upton, can answer that a little bit better. But I do know that if you have questions and you don't know who your consulting forester is or your stewardship forester, then I would go on Associated Oregon Loggers and have them help you also. So that's another resource. So Associated Oregon Loggers. But Jeremy, I have to say one thing on Mike Phillips' behalf from LeLand Logging. His grandfather, Bud Laughlin, put in one of the culverts on the property. And then Mike Phillips, the grandson, got to take that one out and replace it. So it's kind of family and family together. It was kind of a neat thing. I found it neat. I don't know if Mike found it neat.
That's awesome. Looks like we got one more from Melanie Gangle. Thanks so much for the presentation. Very helpful. Would you please share more information or details about how you developed your management plan and more details how your family is learning how to, the next generation is learning how to manage the property? Thank you.
Dad's a little quiet this morning. So we developed our management plan, not because my father needed one. Dad knows he knows every blade of grass, every fern, every tree, because he most likely planted it or watched it grow when he was growing up. So He didn't need that, and he, as you can see, he's a man of very few words, but he is a man of extreme integrity of action. And so us kids have learned by just growing up on the farm, through watching him and helping him and working side by side with him. But when it came down to writing the management plan, we needed a consulting forester. Our stewardship forester guided us through that and gave us the information on how to find that, to write it out. And then our consulting forester let us write as much as we wanted to write, but he gave us the guidance on what needed to be technical and, you know, all the other things. So I really encourage someone to work with a consulting forester. And succession planning, Dad wasn't really needing to do that, but us kids really needed it. So we just approached it that way, that we want to continue the dream and we need the guidance. That's how it kind of came about.
All right, and I don't see any other questions. I will comment to Chris Erickson. I think your question will be answered here shortly from Dan, and you might have an opportunity to get a different answer. All right, so we'll move into our first video. If you have questions at any time, feel free to post them in either the question and answer or the chat room. I'm keeping an eye on both, and Mike will let me know if I miss anything. So the next video has a focus on logging and clear cutting. As you saw from the first video we already watched, logging played a big part of preparing for the culvert by providing the funds to be able to afford to put in the new culvert, as well as most likely for replanting in the area. This video will feature LeLand Payne, who you just met, as well as Dan Upton. Dan is the consulting forester for LeLand's property and LeLand, as well as a longtime forester and a very important to the Oregon Tree Farm system, he's an inspector. So without any further ado, Mike, if you're ready, please play the next video.
When we started to set up the logging that we did this past year, there's a few steps that we had to follow, and I thought I might just go through those for the benefit of the audience. Once we chose the area that Lee wanted to harvest, we had to, first of all, establish the boundaries, and that included or involved checking out some survey corners and actually having a surveyor come out and refresh a portion of the boundary that was adjacent to a neighbor. Timber trespass is the last thing any of us want to do. Right now I'm standing next to what's called a brass cap, which was established by the Bureau of Land Management, all done by really specific surveying standards. And it's important to know not only where the property corner, and it might be an iron pipe, it might be a piece of rebar with a yellow surveyor's cap on it, but it's important to know where those corners are, especially if they're next to you. And it's important to preserve them because they're here for a purpose, of course, and that's to define property. And so one ready source of locating information on property corner location is through the county surveyor's office. All the property surveys have been recorded as a deed, and it's easy to find those with some help, and it'll explain what to look for, where they are, how far it is, and between corners, and what the distance is. Once you know where the corners are on paper, then you can go out and with a little looking around, you can locate them and mark them and interconnect between them to mark your property line. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that prevents any timber trespass. And that's the least fun of all the operations in the woods, is trespassing on the adjacent owner. When you're out and about, sometimes you'll come across what we call bearing trees. These are trees that were selected in reference to the corner itself. They're generally located in, if they're available, at least in 3 points of the compass. There's an example of one here, which is a tall stump that was cut and was sloped at a 45-degree angle. And oftentimes there's metal placed over the top so that keeps the stump from rotting.
Also on the face of the stump, facing the corner, the actual corner pin or the brass cap, oftentimes you'll find trees with metal tags on them, and it'll actually say bearing tree. And there'll be a distance and a compass bearing from that tree to the corner. And they're set up so you can cross-reference or triangulate onto the corner. And it's very important information to know before you start your work. Once we had established the boundary and we knew where the unit was, I went ahead and you have to take out a notification of operation with State Forestry to ensure that the resources you're working with and around, or if needed, are going to receive protection. And then we chose a logger, and it's important that you have a person that understands what needs to be done. And if you have a question about where to go to find out who might be good, Oregon Department of Forestry has a list of reputable loggers, and so that's a good resource. And of course, word of mouth, if you have neighbors that are actively engaged, that's a good route to take too. And once you get your logger established, it's important to have a contract with the logger to spell out what his responsibility is and what your responsibility is. And there are some very simple forms that accomplish that. That way, everyone knows what's to be expected and there aren't any surprises. I guess I got ahead of myself. The most important thing in the whole process is to check with the local mills to see what log prices are. It may be, at a given point in time, you may feel it's not worth your time to give away your timber if the prices are low. But once the price is okay and you've established contact with a log buyer, you request a purchase order for logs delivered to their mills, and then you start the process. And by requiring the logger to have what we call trip tickets or a ticket book, where each load of logs has a paper ticket signed to it, and once a ticket is received at the mill and the logs are measured or scaled, that information is sent into a scaling bureau, which can provide the owner with a scale ticket for that particular load, and there's a cross-reference to the trip ticket. So log accountability is a very important part. Once the timber harvest is complete, there's usually the follow-up cleanup where slash and brush is piled, and then the unit is ready for planting the following winter. And in a nutshell, that's how it's done. And that's what we did here, and it worked out pretty well. And that's what forestry is. We plant and grow and harvest, and this is the planting phase. You can see brush piles behind me with a slash that was left over from the logging. The ground has been piled and cleaned up. This fall, after we get substantial rain, the piles will be burned. Two main reasons for that is to eliminate any potential future fire spread. Even though we think we'll be okay with the ground being pretty bare, the fire won't rip too fast, but it's always good to get rid of it. Plus, it helps eliminate habitat for rabbits and sometimes mountain beaver that like to feed on the new seedlings. It's a great home for them. This ground is planned for planting in January or February of 2021. We like to plant on a 10 by 10 spacing, or 435 trees to the acre. It's important to remember when you're at this phase that you have to order your seedlings early in the process. It used to be you could wait until on into the fall and call up any nursery and get your trees. Now you need to be thinking about it in May, June, and not much later than July, just because there's fewer nurseries and not as much not as many surplus seedlings as there used to be. be sure and match your seedlings to your growing site. You can talk with the stewardship forester from Forest Grove in our area, Brent O'Neill. They have information on the proper seed zone that you're working in, and you want to make sure you buy seedlings that came from that seed zone. That's because they're made to grow there. Other trees will grow and survive, but they won't grow at an optimum rate. It's important to remember that this is some of the best tree growing ground in the world, but it's also good at growing everything else, including weeds and brush. After logging, the ground looks pretty bare, but in a year from now, it's going to be filled in with a variety of grass and weed seeds and some brush that may sprout back. So generally, it's a couple of years after harvest or after planting that there's vegetation control required. Small areas like this was a 6-acre unit. The work is all done with a hand crew using backpack sprayers, and there's a variety of options. Generally, again, you can reference Department of Forestry, and they'll give you great guidance on the proper mix to use for controlling any unwanted vegetation. There is a reforestation rule that within 2 years after harvest, you need to have at least 200 trees per acre planted on a good spacing, not all bunched up. Well distributed is the term that's used. And it's important to maintain, of course, their vitality and their vegetation control is the method of doing that. It's been tough the last 5 to 7 years. We've had hot, dry springs and dry summers, been some higher than average mortality. So anything that we can do to keep the weeds off our trees, it's a plus. It gives them a better chance of surviving. At the end of 6 years after timber harvest, the trees must be in a condition called free to grow, simply meaning that they're above any competing vegetation. Usually once the trees are up around 3 to 4 years old, they're above any competition and they can outgrow whatever's there. And there's not much concern, except there might be a need for some spot spraying for Scotch broom or Himalaya blackberry. Those are 2 very aggressive species that can easily take over a young plantation. So with that in mind, my hope is that within about 3 or 4 years, this will look like this will be a new forest. I expect the trees to be in the vicinity of 2 to 4 feet tall, and all of a sudden the leaders that are growing 6 to 8 inches a year will be starting to grow upwards of 2 to 3 feet a year. The best part of the whole cycle, as far as I'm concerned, means we've accomplished our goal of putting back what we removed, and it's off and running.
All right, I'd like to ask Leland and Nicole and Dan Upton to turn on their cameras for me. Hey there, Dan. All right, we got a few questions, and I'll go get started from the top. Mike Barsotti asks, why were some trees left in the logging area? I believe he's referring to the standing trees, not the trees still in the log deck at the time of filming.
Well, I can answer that. Those were undersized, non-merchantable trees, and they, at some point in time, will become merchantable because they were basically native trees. They were naturally seeded. I guess there was no sense in taking them out. I mean, we're trying to grow trees and they're established. They will not be a competition for the new seedlings. If anything, they'll help add a little shade over time. So primarily, we didn't want to undo what Mother Nature had already started doing. So that was our main reason.
Yeah, and it increases the diversity of the stand as it grows as well, I think, which will kind of cue into this next question from Chris Erickson. Are you worried about a lack of seedling genetic diversity? A lack of diversity can lead to vulnerable pestilence.
Well, no, personally, I'm not. Professionally, I'm not. We're growing trees that were where seed was collected on from the local seed zone. We're matching seedlings to the site. We've had a long history of Douglas fir growing in our region. It's a Doug fir zone. There's always some damage from insects and root rot. Those are naturally occurring events. I think the trees have a built-in resistance to regarding diversity.
Great. Wilda and Steve Caffaretta asked, how do you, maybe this is for LeLand more, how do you balance wildlife objectives with timber objectives?
That's what I think too. It happens.
Yeah, it just happens. And he's careful what he's selecting for clear sections. He's not doing large acreage at a time. He's doing small acreage at a time purposefully, and keeping the integrity of the land. And really, we have the consulting forester and the stewardship forester out there helping us, and Fish and Wildlife this time, helping us to make sure that we aren't harming, so that wildlife will be welcomed. And variety of wildlife changes when there is a clear cut. So there's more welcoming for certain wildlife. And then as the young trees grow, this wildlife kind of evolves differently. So.
Well, the one thing that's a major benefit of small clear cuts is the edge effect. It provides habitat for a variety of species. And as Nicole said, as the stand ages, the species mix changes. We're always hearing about the need for cover for big game. There's plenty of residual timber on the neighbor's land and also on LeLand's for addressing that issue. But it's amazing to see the variety of small animals that are attracted to an opening with this edge effect. Lots of birds, squirrels, chipmunks, those small guys that we don't really see. We remember seeing the deer and the elk because they're so large and stand out, but there's something there for all of those animals.
Great, and I think personally, I know that there are benefits of having those open areas for some time for wildlife. They benefit from being able to cross over into different forests and just having that space to eat at the new species there on the ground that are growing. All right. And maybe, I don't know if you'll have to answer this one, Dan. This might be a Brad question for later, but Bill Mattil asks, can you seed small lots by scattered seed only?
I have never tried that. I know historically the Department of Forestry used that technique on a broad scale in reseeding, trying to reforest the Tillamook burn. And it met with varied success. The biggest concern in seeding is, number one, you need to have mineral soil exposed across the landscape. The seed will not work its way down through brush and slash, even natural vegetation that may be growing. So site prep is number one, meaning heavy scarification of the ground, removing basically all the vegetation and leaving the dirt, if you will, exposed. Seeding is, it requires it's at risk for birds and the small animals eating seed to a degree. Germination is first and foremost, and of course having a successful seeding program. So that requires a moisture regime, and sometimes when the way the weather is going, it might be risky for that. So I can't really tell you if any of that has been done. Brad might have a better handle on that when he comes on. So I would be sure and ask him.
Yeah, I'll save that one, and we'll get Brad's answer and see what he says. Looks like we got a question from John Doomer, and I bet Kathy Doomer is there as well. Did you replant with exclusively Douglas fir, or was it a mix? And maybe now you can also talk about where you got your seedlings from and any details behind that.
Yeah, we have only Douglas fir planned for this site. It's hard to sometimes have these alternate species. I think a lot of are planted like cedar or grand fir. They'll grow and they'll survive, but the cedar seems to be like the ice cream cone species for the large animals. The deer and the elk love it, so it takes extra time and effort to protect those. Partly the reason for the Douglas fir in the long term is the value on investment. Douglas fir commands a higher price at the mills versus grand fir. We did save a half a dozen yew trees that were growing on the site at LeLand's request. And so that was pretty neat. I like doing that myself. They're such a rare and interesting tree. So we do have a little biodiversity, but primarily we're planting Douglas fir. There are several forest seedling nurseries in the region. IFA has several in Oregon and Washington, and you can contact that outfit and see what they have for availability. Like I mentioned in the video, be sure and do it early. Maybe July is way too late. I would probably think about doing it early winter or January. Anytime from now on, I'd go ahead and start looking if you're thinking of planting. I purchased these seedlings from Willamette Seedling Nursery over in Canby. They make they grow an excellent Doug fir 1-1, which is a tree that's been 1 year in the nursery bed and 1 year transplanted. So it's a stout tree with a really nicely developed root system. We talk about root to shoot ratio. You want about 2/3 of the stem of the tree being in stem and 1/3 of it in root. And he does a good job of that. So yeah, I guess that's about that.
Great, and we got 2 more, and we're ahead of time, so we could probably take even another one. And I think for this one, Nicole and Leland, you might want to clarify this. There was a note during the video when Dan was talking about the use of herbicides, and I don't believe that you don't use, or you do. Okay, no, that's what I thought. So Sandra Gangle asks, you mentioned clearing weeds a couple years after replanting. Should that be done on a regular schedule? Is it done by hiring a team to do the spraying? And maybe Dan, you can talk about other landowners that have used herbicide usage or pesticide usage for their plantings as well.
Well, Nicole, do you want to talk about your focus first?
What, from Dad's perspective, he does not like to use the herbicides. He prefers the land to try and regenerate on its own. He really is worried about just eradicating all the underbrush because he loves his trilliums and little orchids and the little beauty, all the little flowers. He does not want those to leave after a logging project. Those are so significant to him that he's willing to do the manual work. And he's a little leery of the long-term effects of spray, and that's his own personal thought process and where he's at right now. So he just kind of wants to leave the land in its own. It does take a lot more work for manual removal of Scotch broom if it decides to grow or anything like that. And it does make the trees have to work a little harder. And we have a little bit of a video later down the road. You'll get to see an area where we're kind of struggling with, and then how we're replanting that and trying to get them free to grow. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's excellent. That's the thing about small woodland owners. There's many ways to accomplish the goal. And the important thing is to find the technique that is most desirable by the individual owners. You asked Jeremy about other landowners that I've worked with. Primarily, everyone that I've dealt with has gone ahead with vegetation control using herbicides. The routine is depending on the timing. Typically, if it's an early spring or early summer harvest, there's a chance for green up within the unit. Things sprout back. So we conduct what's called a site prep spray, with the idea that we're preparing that ground for successful tree planting the following year. There's contract forestry crews that are licensed and for this type of work, and that's what I use. I have a crew I've used for a long time, and they're reliable and professional and certified and insured, and they do a quality job. Typically, after harvest, there's a follow-up spray in the spring to help control all the grass and weeds that are in the ground at the time of harvest or blow in during the summer from surrounding areas. Typically, it takes a couple of years of vegetation control until the seedlings have established a good root system and are starting to put on some height. Like we mentioned earlier, once they're up above the vegetation, of course, there's no need for spraying. And we hope the trees grow quickly, so there isn't a need for control. I mentioned it's been tough the last several years because of our weather patterns, and we've had high mortality rates from some across the landscape, up around 50%. So water is the biggest limiting factor in tree survival at the beginning. And anytime there's weeds and grass stealing that water, it's important to make the trees let the trees have as much as they can get. There is a need occasionally for spot spraying, as previously mentioned, for Himalaya blackberry and Scotch broom. But that is, again, it's all backpack application. Most of the work we're doing is in small units or on small units, or it's close to vineyards. More and more vineyards are going in the foothills. And so to eliminate the risk of damage from aerial application, even if we had a larger unit, we're still using backpack application.
Great. Thanks a lot, Dan and LeLand and Nicole. I think I read my clock wrong. Oh, we need to move on. But don't worry, you'll have opportunities for more reforestation questions. And I do see too for the next Q&A. This next video is about reforestation and features the same people, LeLand, Nicole, and Dan. So if you're ready, Mike, please go ahead and cue that up.
We're up here on the southwest side of my dad's property, and he's talking about this 15-acre section that was clear-cut harvested. And this was his actual first time not harvesting himself. He's harvested everything on his own property himself, but he hired out this one. So it was an adventure for all. Of course, per contract, the loggers hire out or to have somebody come in and they do the replanting. And we harvested in 2013, right, Dad?
Yeah.
And then they planted their first plant in 2014, and then you kind of wait it out and see how they're all doing. Dad could see by 2015 that their survival rate wasn't that great. Normally you kind of want an 80–90% survival rate, and we kind of got more like a 10% survival rate.
Part of the problem was when they replanted it, they J-worded part of the trees. One guy that was planting was experienced enough to know what he was doing.
And what does J-rooting do to a tree?
Well, they get the roots pointed up and not get them down in the ground. And then that sets the survival rate off.
Yeah. So it was really a harsh first go around. And that's not necessarily just because of the J rooting. We have drought happening that year. Drought's terrible, and this is not close to any water. There's tall timber up against there, that's the city's timber, and the elk like to come out of there, and the deer, and they come and snack, and then they go right back in. So they're coming out for a good browsing on the trees. So a lot of our trees suffered browsing, a lot of our trees suffered drought, and then there was the J rooting on the initial go round. But so he could tell, and Dad could tell in 2015 that he would need to do fill planting. And so in 2016 he did you pre-order? Or were you able to just get some?
I just got some.
Yeah, in 2016 we had the luxury of just going down to get some seedlings. That's maybe not the case these days. And picked up 1,600 trees, and then he mostly fill planted himself, and his kids helped a little bit. And we still had a rough patch up the top by that tall timber. The elk are just coming out and eating them all. And then of course there's heavy drought. But the rest of it, a lot more took. So as you can see here, you can't see all the trees. There's a lot of trees in here, but you can't see them all because of the brush. So the county came through and did an aerial shot somehow. They got an aerial because they were seeing if people are keeping their timber deferment up. And we worked with the county. Jordan down at the tax assessment office is wonderful. She is just really willing to help you and help you understand what they needed to make sure we're compliant. So it was super helpful that I visited with her, and Dad got to meet her later in the days. When we were working with the county, we had a stalking survey already scheduled because we needed to know what we had in here. And so we worked with our consulting forester, Dan Upton, and he came up and did a stalking survey for us of the entire 15 acres, and he found that we surpassed the needs of per acre trees per acre, and we had 437 trees per acre, where we only needed 200 trees per acre to meet the goal to satisfy the timber deferment. So even with all the drought, the browsing, the first huge loss in our first planting, that's pretty good, I feel, you know. So what do you think, Dad?
Yeah.
So, and then in 2020, Dad was off with having sibling time, brother time, none to say, and he let us kids. This is the first time all four of us kids got to do something without Dad on the property supervising or helping us. And so he trusted us to come up here, and we planted coastal redwoods. And he's never planted coastal redwoods. That would be we're trying it to see if maybe they would be browsed less, maybe they'd survive the drought a little better. We're just seeing. So we planted 400 amongst here, mostly up that area, to see if they'll take. And so we're just waiting it out and seeing if they're going to make it. A lot of successful tree growth is by ground preparation. And so Dad doesn't necessarily believe in herbicides spraying, so we have done natural and manual control of trying to manage the weeds. So Dad, can you talk about why you don't want to use herbicides?
Oh, I just don't trust them as far as they should.
So you're just not comfortable?
No. Our neighbors don't use herbicides.
Yeah, nobody up here on the mountain, I don't believe anybody has used herbicides on this mountain. But Dad does manually remove, you know, we both work at it, but he did the most, and he went in here in I don't know what year, 2018 or 2019 January, and he weed-eated all 15 of these acres for all the Scotch broom and the woody underbrush, and then now we just have pretty thin underbrush growing.
It's starting to show up. Yeah. You're starting to see the tops of the trees.
The tippy tops are coming.
So, yeah, I still don't think they dissolve as quickly as they claim they are. Yeah.
So we've just decided that we're not quite comfortable with having herbicides up here. Our neighbors and our other family that own part of this mountain, they haven't ever done the herbicides either, and it's just something that we've chosen to do. just one route to do it. We'd rather do the manual and just see how they go that way. We've not had a problem with manual usually. This is a unique situation for Dad's tree growth. So what do you think, Dad? What is the future outlook for this 15 acres?
To see what pops up.
Yeah, so over time we're just going to see how they do and continually manage manually and just encourage the growth.
All right. There's LeLand and Nicole, and Dan, if you could come on back up. No, I'm going to ask the two questions we received towards the end of the last Q&A first. I don't see any other new questions yet, so probably have time for, we'll remove them a little bit behind, so probably just these two for now. So Steve Knight asks, have the recent problems with forest fire control had any impact on your management planning?
Do you want to talk about that, Dad? So forest fire control is one of Dad's top priorities. He has managed from a young man, he purposely limbs the timber from when they're younger to even the older ones. He just limbs them up as high as he can, keeps the underbrush short. So he has a strong wildfire management plans in his, and all of us children, the girls, we all are on board with that. So we don't want a forest fire up there. If it does happen, we want to certainly try to do our best to manage that. And then we also, Dad being a retired logger, he has a fire tank up there. And then we had our stewardship forester, Brent O'Neill, come up and really help us understand. And of course, Dan Upton also walked us through the technical side of where our water resources are for the wildland firefighters if something ever was to happen up there on Cooch Mountain.
Yeah, one thing that's a real plus for LeLand's tree farm is it's well roaded. So there's excellent access for moving equipment if needed to just about every corner of the ownership. One thing that I was very impressed with is that LeLand rebuilt his old fire trailer this past summer, and it's now state of the art. Looks like something that should be in the state fair, just going down the street, showing off. Really turned out well. I forgot, what size is the tank?
1,100.
1,100, so it's a great water supply to have for initial attack.
Awesome. I think actually the other question from last time, I'll read it just so it's heard. Trina Worthington said, "Hi neighbors. Not only does Lena take care of his own trees, but he gladly helps out his neighbors. Tell me more about how you take care of the overgrowth of weed and brush not using chemicals." I think that was answered last time, so we're going to move forward, but I just wanted to state it. Bill Matilla asks, where did you get your coastal redwood seed? Do you think it could survive in an oak savanna stand over time? And I think in the video you had seedlings, not seed, but maybe you can touch on that briefly, Nicole, and then we'll move forward.
We actually have I went to a Master Woodland Manager course and met the son of Terry Lamers, and the Lamer family is really coastal redwood friendly. They just really love it, and they have it on their part of their property. So they promoted it very strongly. We talked a little bit with our stewardship forester, Brent O'Neill, about it, and we just thought we'd try it. So Dad and I did go down and pick up a couple hundred down in Eugene, but really Terry Lamers is the one who connected us with how to get the coastal redwoods. And we did get the seedlings. They weren't seeds, they were seedlings.
Awesome. And I don't know if we'll have an answer for this. Dom and Chris Mahay / Babs asks, what is G-vooding? And I'm not familiar with that.
J-rooting.
It's J-rooting.
J-rooting.
It's when the tree is planted in the ground instead of going in straight. It ends up looking like the letter J with the tips of the roots pointing upwards. And it's guaranteed death for the seedling because all the growth for the seedling is in the tips of the roots at the bottom of the hole. And it just runs out of moisture in the spring.
All right, well then let's move on to our next video, which is about thinning. And for this one will feature LeLand Payne, Dan Upton, and now to the stage, Brad Withrow Robinson. Brad is the OSU Extension Agent for Benton, Lynn, and Polk counties, but I know that he's very active in other counties outside of his jurisdiction. You might have a connection to Brad already. Many people seem to know him if you're connected to OSU Extension. And if not, you might be connected to a different OSU Extension forester throughout the state. Please enjoy the next video about thinning.
I'm Dan Upton, a consulting forester, and I had the privilege of working with LeLand and on his past forestry work here. And we're here today to talk about some of the work that's been done in the past. And this beautiful stand behind us is a nice 70-year-old Douglas fir stand with some native biodiversity that's filled in through the thinning process. And I thought maybe, Lee, you could talk about the brief history of how this stand got to be like it is.
Well, when I bought the place, I logged the dominant trees out till we run out of trees, and that's what was left over.
So by opening it up, you ended up getting the understory trees filling in.
Yeah.
And then with probably the added light that came in from the opening,
Yeah.
you probably got a lot of this understory brush and some maple. I see a couple of dogwoods once in a while. There's one down there.
Once in a while.
So, yeah, so we ended up, did you come back into the stand at all later?
No.
Did you make a commercial thinning entry? Or?
No, it was taking care of itself.
So you just let it go?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was sort of an overstory release of a bunch of younger reprod is what it sort of sounds like, and it came in at a pretty good spacing and grew really well. And knowing, just letting it happen, watching it, and saying it's going where I want it to go was good enough. That was a really key part of management, is making decisions. You don't actually have to go out and cut anything down to be managing a piece of property. Yeah. You're looking at it and you're deciding, gee, is this headed where I want? And it was. And so it didn't have to do anything else. Or if it's getting off the path, then that's when you have to do another action.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just sort of watched it, made sure it was going where you wanted.
It did.
It looks like it did pretty well.
It looks like it did.
Took care of itself quite well.
Kind of snuck up on me.
So now we've moved over to a 20-year-old Douglas fir stand that Lee planted himself. And I'm going to let Lee talk about the history of it and the work that he's done here. And then we'll maybe talk about future plans in here. So Lee, you want to tell us what you did here?
Well, mostly just pruning them and getting the limbs up higher.
Well, you made a small clear cut here to start with to kind of clean it up.
Cleaned it up. Yeah, had alder and Douglas fir and cedar mixed in here. So I cut it and then replanted it to Douglas fir.
And it's 20 years old, we think?
Yeah.
About 20?
20 years around that.
So it filled in real well.
Yeah.
In fact, in a couple of spots, almost too well.
Yeah,
So
it has in places, yeah.
Got kind of crowded.
Yeah, I need to cut out some of the small ones.
Yeah. But we can see that now because you've been busy pruning this.
Yeah.
And not everyone prunes as thoroughly as this. Why have you been pruning it?
I want to get up and then keep the fire out of the crown if I got a fire in it, if I can.
And so how are you started early then? You started pruning them quite a while ago?
Yeah, quite a while ago. And each year, 2 or 3 years, I go back through and try to get it higher. Keep pushing it up.
Have you had any damage from sun scald?
Not on this one. I have in past, down by the house when they cut trees.
Did you do anything to this stand to prevent sun scald?
I leave the limbs on the southwest side to keep it from sun.
Do you have to come in a certain distance, or just the row, the trees that are exposed?
Just the row along the edge.
Just on the edge.
So the edge row there, yeah.
Yeah, good.
It seems to work for me, I don't know.
Well, it's amazing the amount of sun scald you can get on the south side, south and west side.
Southwest side, that's when it does it.
What do you think you're going to do with this stand in the next 10 years?
Oh, probably thin it before that.
You're going to maybe come in, do an understory thin, kind of take the small stuff out?
Yeah, cut that down.
And
chop
so
it up
along
so it'll
about
deteriorate.
age 30, maybe a light commercial thin?
Maybe if it stand it.
Yeah. Well, you can definitely see the crop trees versus the non-crop trees.
Yeah.
So it gives you a good target.
When we were looking at this stand before, you know, it's always, the thinning question is always a bit challenging for people, especially people who are newer to tree farming, don't have the eye for how a stand is growing and developing as LeLand does, and they don't always notice that a stand needs thinning until after it should have been done. And so the two of you, I listened to you talking, picturing pretty clearly where you think this is going and what you might get to doing. And you know, if we look at this stand, it is a little bit thick, but we're also seeing a lot of separation happening. You know, they didn't all start exactly the same. So as they begin to compete, they're not competing on equal footing. And so, as you say, the crop trees are helping identify themselves. They're beating out some of the other ones, and some of the losers are already losing pretty badly. And that, not everyone likes that, but the advantage is when you do come to do this thinning in 8 years, you know, first, and then the other one later, you'll have enough trees that have a good crown. They aren't all losing crown at the same rate. And so the winners are marking themselves out, and you'll have probably a pretty good choice of long-term trees to leave. And that's an advantage sometimes when you get to that. So yeah, it's fun to see how you picture this growing.
Yeah.
The brush, this much brush, small, I mean, you said you would grind them up if you could have, but you know, they melt down pretty fast here. You cut them up, and any of the things that you cut down, if you cut them into little pieces, on the west side, branches like that will rot away pretty quick. And it has some nutritional value. It's staying right here.
Yeah, I think it does quite a bit. Needles does more, I guess.
Yeah.
I think it does good for them.
Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't take any extra work, does it? You just leave it there, and it does good for it.
Okay, we're standing in a 40-year-old Doug fir plantation. Trees were purchased through state forestry, and Lee and family planted this stand. It's now at the stage of being eligible for commercial thinning. It was not pre-commercial thinned, it's just grown from day one to its present status. And in looking around, it's turned out, in my opinion, to be a pretty good stand at this age. There is some overcrowding, but a lot of it is pretty well spaced, but there's still opportunity for removing some commercial size trees. And Lee, you have a long history of commercial thinning, and you have in the past explained some of the do's and don'ts, things to look for when you're doing that. And I wonder if you could just talk about that a little bit.
Well, it is a lot to get your roads in and get your trees fell where you want them. And other guys, when they thin, they get in there maybe a skidder, and they'll pick the dumb logs off the ground, which you don't want to do. You want to leave them low so they'll turn easy. You pick them up, then they got to turn from the butt to the machine, and that's when you do most of your damage.
Dan, I'm thinking this is also eligible for cut to length mechanical harvest, isn't it?
Yes, it is. The ground is not too steep. Would be a matter of using the cut to length machine to develop corridors where they will take logs from either side. One of the nice features about cut to length is, as far as soil disturbance, all the slash and any brush that happens to be in the understory goes in the skid road and helps with soil compaction, minimizing soil compaction. And they generally can reach out about, on average, 40 feet in either direction and directionally fell the tree. So it avoids the damage that Lee was talking about.
A lot of the damage that Lee was talking about, both in falling in the wrong place, but also handling cutting them into smaller individual pieces for taking them out.
Moving back to the stand composition, there is some hardwood scattered through here, primarily maple.
Yeah.
And we had talked about biodiversity in the past and wondered what your focus was, Lee, on any of the hardwood that's in here. Would it be something you'd take out, or would you let it stay to add
Well, depends on what kind of spacing you get. I don't like to create a big hole up there, and that's your wind gets in that, and
Oh, yeah.
you get wind damage to your other trees that you leave.
I'm looking at a maple right in front of me, and it's almost columnar versus the normal pattern of where there are large round crowns taking up a lot of space. And so if you took out trees around it, that might become really a potential crop tree over time.
Yeah, these are individual seedlings, so they have pretty good form. They haven't become wolf trees.
Yeah.
And you know, as you're saying, if you came and you had a nicer maple than the fir beside it, you could favor them without creating those holes. Whereas if you went out to kill every maple you saw, you'd create holes that would actually work against you and your fir.
It could.
So this stand has had a lift of pruning, looks like about 6 to 8 feet. Would you continue pruning on the crop trees?
Yeah, I would. I'd push some dead limbs off of it.
So you're happy with this, how this is going?
So far.
You know, it's interesting to compare this stand with the one we visited earlier, the 20-year-old stand.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have been fun to have seen this one 20 years ago to know what it would look like today. Looks to me like this one is better established. The dominants are better established.
Yeah.
Well, they've had a little longer to do it. I think those dominants are claiming their ground pretty fast there.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. But I like stands like this because this is, you know, this is where we're trying to get, and what we're often trying to do with a pre-commercial, to be able to come in here, get to a commercial thinning at age 30 to 40, where you have not every tree with a deep crown, but plenty of trees that have enough crown, and a landowner can really make a lot of decisions. You have a lot of, this is where you put your mark on the stand for the next 30 years. It doesn't have to be a very regimented one. You can be making a prescription that allows you to keep, favor whichever hardwoods. You can open it up more to let a little more light in the understory if you want to give a flush of growth, or you can keep it real tight if you're willing to come back for multiple thinnings and are favoring timber production. So this is really, I think, the opportunity that landowners ought to be looking for, because your stand is developed in a way, you've been watching it, it's developed in a way where you have a lot of choices here in a stand like this. It's not going to be a super profitable harvest probably, but there's plenty to take out and a lot of good looking trees to leave, I think.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Dan and now Brad will be joining us for some questions. And Brad, I'll start with you. I hope you had some time to dwindle on the question we received earlier about seeding small lots. I've been saving it for you. So Bill Matilla asks, can you seed small lots by scattered seed only?
I thought Dan did a very good overview of some of the challenges on that. And I think there are limitations, beginning with where does your seed come from? We collect forest seedling seed from sometime orchards, seed orchards where we are growing selected trees. A lot of seed used to be collected from out in the wild, but our Douglas fir, and so we do have some supplies of seed. Some people, we often talk about natural seeding, letting it seed in from itself, but you have to be aware that Douglas fir, most of our forest trees don't necessarily produce regular annual seed crops. And then, so you may be quite a few years between a harvest point and a good seed crop. And so that might not give you a very good result because, as Dan pointed out, Douglas fir is a species that really likes to have bare mineral soil. This has been coming up more lately in the case of the fires on the Cascades, because we do have bare mineral soil, but they're an issue, and it may be a plausible solution in some situations there. The challenge there is you may or may not have seed trees surviving that can provide that seed. And finally, because of those fires, we're often going to find supplies of some of our things that we need. Seeds and seedlings both might be limited. So overall, in Western Oregon, where we have a lot of competitive growth, we have tended to go to seeding, planting seedling trees rather than depending on scattering seed. It is a lot of little reasons that come together on that.
Thanks, Brad. All right, I think this one's for Nicole and for LeLand. Sandra Gangle asks, is any part of your property inappropriate for tree planting because it is wet? If so, what if anything, have you planted on those acres?
Some wet ground. You have to plant around it.
Did they hear that, Jeremy?
I think so. I think I heard it.
We planted alder in some of the places that have root rot to try and minimize that. He's had some success with that, so that's kind of been a technique. Is that not correct, Dad?
I think that this might also get touched on briefly in our next video about the culvert itself and the wetland areas. I'm not seeing any other questions. I'll give it 30 seconds or so. If you have a question, maybe type it in now, or maybe.
I might just add on the wet site planting. Leah, I don't think you really have a wet area that you've planted. I think everything you've either planted around it or it's seeded in naturally over time. And alder is one of the species that likes that wetter ground, of course, and then red cedar. And you have a lot of red cedar across the landscape on your ownership. Yeah. So I think that probably is the best answer for that question.
And I'll also add to that, on LeLand's property, that's up the slope from the valley floor. And I think what Dan's talking about is true. As you get down into the valley floor, many woodland owner properties often come with different soil types, heavier clays, little flatter bottoms, where there are bigger spots that really aren't as suited to conifers, certainly, in some cases, even trees. So we do get wetter, poorly drained sites more commonly on lower areas. And, it's funny, as a forester, I find myself reminding people that not all places are suitable for trees. And, assessing it and then recognize that if that's the case, and keeping a little meadow or something may be part of your fit into your plan, if diversity is part of that, and may also just be recognizing reality that some of these really poorly drained valley floor sites just aren't very well suited trees. But the Payne property is up in really good tree growing ground, and there's usually a tree of some sort, alder or other, or cedar, that really likes it.
a good rule of thumb, if there aren't stumps there, you probably aren't going to be able to make trees grow. So.
Great. We're about 5 minutes behind, but I'm going to do one more, and then I'll save the other ones for after our next video, which is a little bit of a longer video and feature a few more people. So Chris Erickson asks, I can't get red cedar to grow due to elk browsing. Any ideas on how to deal with this?
Brad, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Dan. You may have more. Elk are notoriously difficult. I mean, deer will come in and browse. Elk will both browse and just pull, chew, harm in a lot of different ways. And so replanting, I think a mix of species, if possible, might help. Even, you know, like that's what Nicole and siblings went to try something exotic, hoping that the elk wouldn't recognize it as food. I can't say if that works. Dan, have you seen any examples?
Primarily, we try mechanical protection in the form of Vexar tubing and bamboo stakes, where each tree has a protective sleeve around it. The special consideration is you have to raise the sleeve high enough on the tree so that the leader is protected, and it requires annual maintenance, if not even going out during the year when the elk may be around, because they love to pull those tubes off. And sometimes they just play with them and don't eat your trees, but oftentimes they'll pull them off and eat the tree. It's a tough one to beat, but it's persistence and mechanical protection are about the best approach I know of. You can also try a big game repellent spray. I know there's a ton of commercial sprays that you can buy at the feed store, and some are effective, but they again require persistence and maintenance. But there's not a sure shot answer, but those are some options.
Great. All right. Yeah, I'm going to move us ahead just because the next video is quite a bit longer than the other ones we've watched at this point. And then after that, I'll leave a little bit extra time for questions before we wrap up. So this video is about the culvert replacement that was mentioned in the very first video, and we'll feature some new faces, but most importantly, it will still feature LeLand. And now it also include, make sure I got everyone here on my list, Monica Blanchard, who is an assistant district fish biologist, Luke Westfall, who is the executive director of the Greater Yamhill Watershed Council. And I'll comment that a lot of watershed councils in Oregon have friendships, or in some cases partnerships, with the Oregon Small Woodlands Association and with our many chapters throughout the state. Dave Stewart, also from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Brent O'Neill from Oregon Department of Forestry, and then Mike Phillips is here today from LeLand Logging. I believe he's the one who placed the culvert. And then not with us today, Todd Woolman from the Weyerhaeuser Company was also part of this project. So Mike, when you're ready, please cue us up.
In Yamhill County, Oregon, Couch Creek starts in the Coast Range Mountains and works its way down to the Tualatin River. Part of its route passes through LeLand Payne's Homestead Tree Farm. A culvert that had been placed in the creek more than 40 years ago was deteriorating and needed to be replaced. This culvert had become an impediment to the native migratory cutthroat trout that call Couch Creek home. By bringing together multiple stakeholders, LeLand was able to get technical and financial support to replace several old pipes with modern fish-friendly culverts.
I work for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. My name is Monica Blanchard. I'm the Assistant District Fish Biologist for the North Willamette District watershed. And so I was contacted by Luke, who works for the Watershed Council locally, and was asked to coordinate on this really awesome passage project. So we work really closely with Oregon Department of Forestry to basically maintain fish passage in forest lands. So the way that our kind of fish regulations work is that we grandfather in old culverts and bridges that may not be up to our current standards for fish passage. But once you actually want to replace them, they're getting old, we require that they meet our current standards. And at this site we have cutthroat trout, which are one of our native migratory fish species. So if there's any of those species present at a site, it needs to comply with our fish regulations and allow passage up and downstream.
So I'm Luke Westfall. I'm the Executive Director for your local Greater Yamhill Watershed Council. We're a nonprofit that helps public, private, and tribal stakeholders do good things on the ground for fish and wildlife and the health of our lands and water in the Yamhill and Chehalem valleys. So we had a unique opportunity to partner with Nicole and LeLand. They've nurtured and stewarded this property for decades. This culvert is being worked on, as well as 2 other culverts that are on the property. And so it's a unique call that you get to have someone say, hey, we'd really like to do something with this property in terms of our creek, and we want to make sure that whatever we're doing, we're doing the right and the good thing for the aquatic organisms out here.
So we have been working on improving fish passage for many years. 2007 maybe that we started to have actual kind of more regulations regarding improving fish passage and maintaining fish passage. And for our regulations, that's to the historic extent. So if fish were there in the past, we need to maintain passage to those areas. There are a lot of complicated factors for fish in the Northwest. And a lot of our fish passage regulations for especially this part of the Willamette Valley are focused on our anadromous species, so our salmon and steelhead, which are also, very commercially valuable. We recreationally fish for them. They have huge, tribal importance. So these are really, really, important species for our region. However, there are a lot of impacts for these fish. And passage is just one piece of the puzzle. So we have seen with passage projects, I've worked on a number of projects where we literally have fish moving past the construction site before the construction is finished. You put water in the creek and you provide passage, and I've had adult coho swim right past me. So providing passage is a really important part of kind of the many-piece puzzle of trying to bring our native fish species back. For this specific site, it's cutthroat trout that we're focused on. And our cutthroat populations, we actually don't have a ton of information on them because they are less of a kind of focal species for some places in the state. But we do have a lot of kind of historical conversations we've had and knowledge that, our cutthroat populations have been impacted by these reduced connectivity between habitats. So a project like this is really important, even though it is not, focused on our kind of more charismatic big salmon and steelhead. It is really important to provide that connectivity for our cutthroat trout populations. So it's very exciting. Our native migratory fish, the reason we kind of call them out for passage is they require multiple different habitats to kind of complete their life history. So they're going to be moving around in the stream a lot more than some of our other fish.
But I remember, LeLand, when you had Monica and I out, you shared a little bit about the history of this pipe, and this was a pipe that you put in,
yeah,
that you were able to do. How long ago was that?
That was 40 years ago. Might have been longer than that. I put that road in up here. I didn't have a road on that side. I knew I had to get a culvert in order to do anything with it.
The Watershed Council and the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife were able to come out to visit this culvert to determine what size might be needed nowadays. So we walked downstream, took measurements, walked upstream and took measurements. And one of the things that we found out by doing that was what's currently in here is about a 4-foot pipe. LeLand had looked at putting in a 6-foot pipe. And what we were able to determine was that an even larger pipe was needed than that to enable fish to migrate, debris to flow, and make sure that we're mimicking those natural processes that the state's trying to accomplish.
From a, potentially a road landowner perspective, this 4-foot pipe is functioning. From the fish perspective, downstream at what we typically have when we have small undersized pipes, we get a big plunge pool at the downstream end because the water's coming through this small pipe and getting funneled like a fire hose, and it's carving out really big plunge pools at the bottom, and then that just over time this pool gets deeper and deeper and the culvert stays where it is. So we end up having what we call a perched culvert. So it's hard for fish to get in there, especially at low water flows. So there might be times when there's enough water in here that fish can go up. It's a really sweet spot because with a small pipe you're going to have really strong velocities oftentimes through that pipe such that a fish cannot swim up it, and then at low water they're not going to be able to jump into it. What also can happen is that you get big piles of debris at the top end, you know, because you're getting this backup. Water can't get through the pipe fast enough, so you're getting rocks and cobbles that fall out. You end up having to maintain it more and maybe move out some of that sediment because it ends up blocking your culvert. So there's a lot of things that over time make a 4-foot pipe not as functional as a larger pipe. For our fish regulations, we require that the culvert, the pipe, or you know whatever you're putting in, be at least the width of our ordinary high water mark. So we move outside the influence of the culvert, measure ordinary high about 6 times, and then take an average of that. And so when we came out here, we realized that we needed about a 9-foot culvert to actually comply with our fish passage regulations. And so that's how we came to that number. It does feel kind of arbitrary, and I know it can also feel like a huge change from what has been working in the past. But those large pipes allow for debris to flow freely and then also for fish to move up and down freely, ideally year-round or kind of whatever that stream would require. For this culvert, you can see there's actually water not coming through the culvert currently. So it is perched, so the height of the culvert is way above the pool. And then also it's rusted out, so there's actually water that's not making it through the culvert and is flowing subsurface, below the culvert. So this provides a problem throughout the year, really, because it's hard for fish to migrate up underneath that culvert. A huge problem for juvenile fish. So we require passage for juveniles as well as adults. So we kind of envision, you know, adult salmon coming back, and they can jump very well. And so they can get into even some of our perched culverts. They're very proficient at jumping. However, our juveniles have a much harder time. So, you know, our juveniles are gonna be moving throughout the system as well. Sometimes they're looking for cold water refugia during the summer, and they can't get to that oftentimes with culverts like this. So it's really important to have a culvert be able to pass water and fish and debris and rocks throughout the year. So with this new culvert, it's going to be basically at or below the ground level. There'll be native material through it, and those fish will be able to move up and down throughout their habitat.
So one of the opportunities that partnering with your local soil water conservation district or local watershed council is trying to provide a variety of resources that can help a culvert project move forward. Sometimes that takes the form of partnering together on grant applications. There are other resources that can be brought in, matching time from state agencies to help with activities such as fish salvages. Sometimes you're even able to partner in forestry settings with an adjacent industrial timber organization. So one of the unique things that we were able to do with this project is to partner with the Weyerhaeuser company. Not only does the Payne family have an existing relationship with Weyerhaeuser, but one of the main contractors that's working on this project and others, Laughlin Logging Company, they also have a relationship with Weyerhaeuser. So building on that framework, we were able to kind of expand this effort, work together on multiple land ownerships and work on multiple culverts.
So from the fish passage component, we work really closely with Oregon Department of Forestry. Oregon Department of Forestry and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife have kind of an agency collaboration. So we're engaged with the stewardship foresters. We have kind of communication on an ongoing basis about different projects. And so we're pretty closely linked. So you can reach out to ODF or ODFW. And we also have a website you can go to find your local district and assistant district fish biologists. We have a few restoration focused employees that can come out, and if you are interested in working on restoration on your land. But I think one of the great things is to contact early. So I think that was what was so awesome about this project is that we were contacted through the chain of agencies a while ago, and so it gives us time to, for example, for the Watershed Council to apply for grants. That can take months, but it's a great way to help subsidize the project. It also allows us to all come out and kind of have that group discussion on what the different issues are, and really kind of formulate a plan. So it's good to just call often and call early. I love the excuse to come out and walk through a beautiful forest like most of my coworkers. So it's a great, we really love to come out and just be in that conversation. I think that communication early on is will make a project really successful. We are all evolving our science and our understanding of these processes. So it's very understandable that it's hard to keep up with as a individual landowner, and we don't expect that. So you can call us and we can keep you up.
I was a stewardship forester and private forest program. We work directly with landowners of the state of Oregon to help them plan and execute installations of culverts like this on private lands. LeLand had me out here to look at a number of different issues, and one of them was this culvert in specifically. And he knew that it was reaching the end of its lifetime. It was rotting out, and he was concerned about it. So he started to get my involvement probably 4 or 5 years ago at least.
To get this construction project going for this culvert replacement, we will first evaluate the site and decide where we want to put our fill material, our waste material. We'll do some tree removal, and we will set up for dewatering the site. We will start by removing the fill, removing the pipe, and we'll excavate down to the engineered level. We'll get our grade set. Then we'll bring in the culvert pipe. The culvert pipe size will be 103 by 71 smashed culvert pipe, 40 foot long. Once we get the grade set, compacted, we will start backfilling the pipe once we have it installed, bolted together. We'll start backfilling in lifts and compacting it with the machine with a compactor, and build ourselves back up. And then we will take some of the leftover boulders and stuff that are on site and rip wrap the inlets and outlets, and we will straw, hay bale all the exposed dirt and put everything back to bed. I've worked with Weyerhaeuser on this. Weyerhaeuser paid for the engineering for both large pipes, and they are buying the pipe on the main road because it's a shared road between Weyerhaeuser and Payne's. Weyerhaeuser is really good about cooperating with landowners and helping on these kind of projects.
Weyerhaeuser has a policy of cost sharing on road systems, especially those that that we use. So we own land next to his property. So one of the culverts that he replaced was on our haul route. So of course we're going to cost share with all landowners. when it comes to that. I suggested that we reach out to a consulting engineer to actually do a design. It's much easier. You spend a couple $1,000s on a design, but when it comes to trying, field fitting culverts, it's much easier if you have some plans in place. We offered to provide those plans, and it actually saves, or it can save on equipment time when you have a set of plans in place rather than trying to fiddle around field fitting the pipe while all the equipment's there. Weyerhaeuser's always interested in pursuing those types of projects.
You've got populations of fish below this culvert and above. And what we did here, essentially, you can see we connected the two. So there's these situations where we see, migratory cutthroat is what we're talking about here. And there are populations that, sometimes they live a very small little section of their life in one little area, but there's also situations where they become migratory, and we see where cutthroat can migrate down to the bigger rivers or even out to the estuary. And vice versa, depending on. So, I think, as far as, biology and, recovering salmonids, being able to open up habitat is the most important thing. And that's why this is big. Because fixing this site, we basically opened up more habitat for these fish. It provides more resilience for them to survive and just, all the way down the lines. In Oregon, whenever you put a new structure in, it's got to meet basically one active channel width. So this stream is essentially roughly 9 feet, the active channel. If you look at the natural channel and you measure it, it's at least 9 feet. The size of this structure needs to also meet that criteria. And the idea being that, we have to have a culvert here because there's a road, but we're trying to make it where stream simulation. When the fish go through it, it's almost like they're in a natural environment. You can see this thing's big enough when you pick up a log, this is a little branch, but the idea is this thing can come through the culvert, right? You see these trees around us. Well, some of these are going to fall down the creek, and the idea that the bigger it is, the more chance wood and gravel is going to easily move through these pipes. And so not only fish, but gravel and physical habitat. So that's why we're always thinking big. And again, I always like to tell people that that's the state standard. The federal standard, if there were salmon here, would be 1.5. So it'd be more like 13.5, 14 feet. So you'd probably be looking at a big open bottom arch, or in some cases even a bridge. I know a lot of landowners, it seems like it's overkill, but when you start to look at it and you realize it's not just fish passage, it's really the kind of ecology and the whole function of the stream. That's what we're trying to get to. When you look at the before and after, so we're looking at the after, and this is a nice deep pool here. I'm not sure how deep it is, but it's a few feet deep. This is just beautiful. This is a huge deep pool. They're migrating up these little riffles, these subunits through here, and they get up into this giant pool, and there, this is like heaven, right? There's some wood, there's some rocks, and now they've got even cover to get up to their next segment. So if you imagine, I'll bet you if you come back here in a year or two, this thing's going to be chock full of fish because they're going to be migrating through and they're going to find this spot. It's kind of ironic because it is unnatural, it's a culvert, but there still is habitat provided here.
So as a watershed council, this is a really exciting project because we get to see habitat connectivity in an upper watershed and an area that has some really resilient populations of cutthroat trout that needed a little bit of support. So this was a great opportunity for us to see habitat connectivity occur, not only for the fish species that are here, but for all of the materials that are flowing up and down the soils, the sediments, and the wood. And I just wanted to highlight the unique partnerships that this project brought together. So you have the local Payne family brought in all of the experts and all of the resources that they would need to make this project go from point A to point B. The Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board offers a small grant program, which is an excellent candidate for any private small woodland family to partner with a soil water district, a watershed council, or your local tribe to try to get some funding. They do up to $15,000 these days for OWEB small grants. So these are really good opportunities to partner with a state funding resource to get a local fish passage issue addressed. all these people are working together to find the resources to work with these small family woodland owners. You know, this was something pretty big to see happen for one subbasin on Cooch Creek, to have this many miles opened up across multiple stems of this tributary. The after results are pretty incredible. You see, not only has the fish passage concern been fully addressed with how the culvert was designed and installed, but you also have all the bells and whistles. Behind us and around us, smaller alders that were in the way of the operation were knocked down, and those will provide habitat and structure for the creek itself. You can also see that all of these really nice western red cedars, some yews further down, all these really nice trees that are cherished by the landowners were able to be saved. And so it's really nice to see. Everybody did a great job out here, and we're really excited to watch this over the years, see how the channel changes, and hopefully have a maintenance-free, well longevity culvert for the Payne family.
You know, LeLand really brought this all to bear, and starting a conversation a number of years ago with me, and although it took a number of years, I think that was the right process, because it brought everybody on board. LeLand is the type of landowner that is just above bar. I've worked with him, you know, in his previous career as a logger, and also as a landowner along the way, and he's just an exceptional person. He truly cares about the land and everything that he's doing.
Wasn't that great? All right, we got a bunch of people coming on the screen now for your questions. I don't see any new questions, but I'll cover the ones we didn't get last time. Let's see, make sure I got everybody who's on the call. Dave and Mike, you guys still there? Mike Phillips, there he is. All right, let's see. Let's just start from the top. Mike Payne has a comment and a question, and he says, LeLand, congratulations on being named as Yamhill County Tree Farm of the Year. He also asks, how much fish stream habitat do you enhance with a 9-foot culvert installation? Might be itch. I'm blanking.
Yeah. I don't know if you want technical information. I think that Luke or Dave will have to express technical information, but from what we're watching and what we did, what Dad wanted to get done really was successful, you know, from how we're looking at it. So does, can Dave answer that or Luke answer that?
Yeah, Luke, do you see that question?
Yeah, I just wanted to double check my numbers right here because I have it. So the 9-foot culvert, which is the largest one, you know, I walked upstream as far as I could go to look at coastal cutthroat trout habitat, and for that culvert of the three was just about a mile of upstream habitat would be unfettered access for cutthroat trout. And then if you look at the other two culverts, there is a waterfall on the culvert upstream of the culvert that was a shared road access with Weyerhaeuser Wyco. But that one, if I had my numbers right, was about 1.5 miles to 2 miles in addition. So you're looking at between 2 and 3 miles of upstream habitat for the coastal cutthroat trout across these fish passage projects that the Paynes implemented.
I did want to say one thing about during the production of it. Dave came out earlier, like the day or two before the culverts were going to be replaced, and collected most of the cutthroat trout and relocated them downstream or upstream with a barrier. But he left us the bucket and the net, because when it was time to actually replace that large culvert, they stopped production for 45 minutes. So stopped it for 45 minutes so that his worker bee, Jimmy McMurray, and myself could get all the rest of the fish out of there. As they were pumping the water low, we were collecting the fish to make sure, and then we would move them downstream. But it's really neat that they were super respectful of LeLand, of my dad's desire to save those fish, and what Fish and Wildlife has been working with us, and they just stopped and let us get all the fish out.
Awesome. All right, let's see what else we got here. Mike Clausey asks, how hard is it to get funding for these projects through the Watershed Council or the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife?
Or is that for Luke?
Yeah, I could, Luke, you might want to take this one. I mean, I think with Fish and Wildlife, we do have some funding, but the more typical path is through OWEB. You know, at least, and Luke, you could speak to that probably.
Yes, yeah. So for a typical upper watershed culvert that a small woodland association member might want to replace, the funding program that I think most watershed councils or soil water districts are going to encourage you to look at is called the Small Grant Program through the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, which is the acronym is OWEB for short. This small grant program is way more accessible to a landowner who might have a project that, if we're looking Willamette Valley wide at the highest priority needs for fish passage or fish recovery, maybe your project isn't the #1 project on that list. This small grant program is intended to be a funding source that a landowner could use to have financial assistance on a project that might not be that kind of top tier, you know, multiple endangered species being benefited and things of that nature. So I would highly recommend any small woodland association member that has a culvert that they'd like assistance with financially or from a technical perspective to talk to your soil water district, your watershed council, and ask them about the OWEB small grant program. They're administered regionally. So our team is made up of the watershed councils, soil water districts, and tribes within Yamhill County, Polk County, a little bit of Benton County, and I think even a part of Marion. So we all get together quarterly to review grant applications that are submitted to improve habitat on the ground, including, a whole number of things, but fish passage is one of the eligible project types. You can ask for up to $15,000 in each grant. They allow a landowner to apply for one project through the small grant program per calendar year. So if you phase things out, if it's more economical if you had 3 culverts and you want to try for 3 grants, you could phase that out over time. Although in the video it's mentioned, you know, sometimes it's cheaper to get all the equipment, all the engineering, everything ready for one big go if you're doing multiple projects in a row. There is what they call a large OWEB grant program. With that, you're not going to be competing with the large grant program. You're going to be competing regionally. So if I submit a grant application for Cooch Creek culverts, it's going to be competing with all of the Willamette Valley grant applications that are submitted, and those can be really difficult to get, at least in the Yamhill area, where we don't tend to rank very high on fish priorities compared to places like Clackamas, Sandy River, the Santiams. You're going to have a lot more endangered species checklist things happening on your grant applications. But that large grant, people request $50,000, $100,000, $200,000. Those are for some big ticket items. And for some landowners, that is the route to go, and you can be successful. And then I'll shut up in just a second, but one third funding opportunity is a unique one where if you have a connectivity to Federal Bureau of Land Management properties, so if BLM had property connected upstream or downstream of your fish passage project, it's possible to work with your soil water district or your watershed council to loop in with the federal BLM office for that area. Sometimes they have extra money in their budgets that they can actually write assistance agreements to help funnel money toward your project. Other times they have something called Title II grant funding. It's also called RAC funding or Resource Advisory Council funding. Those funds, the RAC funds, are contingent on Congress making them available, usually every year, sometimes every 2 to 3 years. And if you can show that you have a species that if you work on your private culvert and you can show that this is a species that would migrate up to a BLM property or has to go through a BLM property to get to yours, you can actually write a narrative that your project will benefit a species that has connectivity to a federal land. So those are kind of the big three. OWEB small grants, definitely encourage you to look at that. OWEB large grants are harder to get. And then the BLM grants are also hard to get, but they also require a connectivity to a federal property. So hopefully I didn't talk too long or too fast on that.
Thank you, Luke. All right, I want to get through 2 more and then we'll wrap up right here before 10 a.m. Ron Gilson asks, why did you choose a metal culvert versus plastic? What are the pros and cons of the 2 different materials? And he says it's probably easier to do it with plastic yourself. Maybe a question for Dan and maybe Brent or Mike.
You'll be able to answer that. Mike?
I start out there. Just this year, plastic culverts, we've had a lot of information come forward and experience. You know, metal culverts eventually rot out and plastic will last longer. But there are pluses and minuses to both types. Plastic only goes up to a certain diameter, so larger pipes are going to have to be metal or plates. Plastic also burns, come to find out, and we found that out in a large degree in our wildland fires this year. So a lot of landowners are having to go back and replace culverts because they burn. So that there's trade-offs to both. And plastic is cheaper generally, and metal, it does rot out eventually. So both have a lifespan, and they're pluses and minuses.
Awesome. All right, and let's see. Melanie Gangle asks, Monica Blanchard mentioned increased federal regulations for salmon habitat. What are other considerations for potential salmon habitat on small woodlands? What habitat management planning should be done? And are there any different grant funding possibilities for salmon? Thank you.
I could probably take that one. So the question was it a federal regulations question?
Yeah, considerations for management of salmon habitat with the idea of more federal regulation on salmon habitat coming into play.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge topic that we can't cover. You know, I could probably talk all day on this, but you know, essentially the way it works is it depends on which species are in your stream. So if you have federally protected species such as, you know, coho, other salmon species that are on the endangered species list, on the federal list, then there's higher protections for those fish. So that's kind of where it starts. This project, for example, didn't have any ESA listed fish. So there was no federal nexus. And that's why we were able to do a 9-foot culvert. Like I said in the video, I said if it would have been under the federal, it would have been 1.5. So it would have been more like a 13, 14-foot culvert, or probably a bridge. So, I mean, I always like to make the point that, you know, there is a bigger cost on some of these projects, but the larger the structure you could put in, the better it's going to be for the landowner, because especially as these flows continue to get higher, depending on climate change, things like that, we're going to see
higher and higher events potentially. So I think if you can put a bigger structure, that's better. For the federal regulations question, I think again, it's just the easiest thing is just to contact ODFW or the Watershed Council and let us walk you through the process, because there's just there's so many layers to it, you know, from the ESA to all the agencies that are involved. A lot of times the federal agencies, they consult with us and they let us take the lead on these projects because they just have too much of a workload. And that's why, again, I always go back to this group that's here, you know, the Watershed Council, all the main players, that if you can contact your local Watershed Council or your SWCD, it's a great place to start because they'll coordinate all the other stuff that's just that higher level stuff. So again, I didn't answer the question there, but I just think it's too big, you know, of a question to really dig into, because there are a lot of different players involved here.
Yeah, outstanding answer, Dave. And I did put my email address in the chat, so if anyone wants to copy that down and shoot me an email, I would be happy to forward it on to someone who's much smarter than me. And I think we got time for one more. I believe this is supposed to be for Mike Phillips. Mike Phillips does an excellent job. How long has he been doing this? And is there any family history of logging in the family, I'm going to say?
Mm-hmm.
Mike?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh.
So I've personally been building road probably for the last 10 years, but I've been involved in road building probably the last 20 or so, starting back with my grandpa. I'm fourth generation working in this area, tree farm. Dan worked with a lot of my grandpa and great grandpa and my dad. So I've been involved in the process for quite a while.
Great, thanks, Mike. All right, well, LeLand and Nicole, if you have any final comments, I'd like you to go before I close this off and have some wrap-up commentary if you'd like to say anything else.
I just really appreciate the effort that everybody came together to produce this video, and everybody spent extra time on walking of Dad's forest and helping learn what Dad liked about his forest, and then just putting that together as little snapshots for our community to learn from and to enjoy with Dad. Just really appreciate everybody being on the video and participating.
All right. Well, first, I'd like to thank all of our panelists and speakers today, both here live and then as well as those that were on the recordings. Not everyone could give up a little bit of their Saturday morning, but I really appreciate all y'all giving up yours. This recording of this Zoom call will be preserved on our YouTube channel. If you are on YouTube, you can search us at Family Forests of Oregon, or in the chat box, you can find a link that I posted a little bit ago. We'd love it if you subscribe to our channel and watch these videos again. I know there were a few issues with the video footage being a little bit choppy during the Zoom, and I think that's just an issue with the broadband and trying to play a live video over Zoom. But you can watch it in higher quality on YouTube, as well as provide other comments there and send links to your friends so they can see the clips. This recording specifically will take about a week or so to get redone. I'll be re-uploading this recording where I will splice in the original footage so it's not choppy when you rewatch the 2-hour-long video. Please consider sharing it with your friends or your other tree farmers that you know. And let's see, we'll make sure I don't forget anything. Please also consider liking us on Facebook. We have 2 pages, Oregon Small Woodlands Association and Oregon Tree Farm System. Both of those pages now have the video links for the playlist of just the separate pre-recorded video live there now. So if you want to go there, and if you're on Facebook, you should give us a like. We post every once in a while. And the other thing I wanted to talk about are 2 other things. First, I also like to thank our sponsors. This call today would not have been possible without the support from the Oregon Forest Resources Institute, and very specifically Mike Clousey, who is a big supporter of OSWA himself, as well as OFRI is a supporter of ours. I'd also like to thank the Oregon Department of Forestry with the first video, which is a video created because of LeLand's status as a Tree Farmer of the Year. ODF every year puts in money that with support from the Forest Service exclusively as well to build that first video for all of our tree farmers of the year throughout the state. Let's see, who am I missing here? We'd also like to thank the Oregon Sustainable Forestry Initiative State Implementation Committee. They put financial support behind these videos and just Oregon Tree Farm System every year. And without any other further ado, if you are not an OSWA member and you received notice of this meeting via mailing, and you should have received what we refer to as the membership RAF card or membership application, please consider joining OSWA. I think we will move back to in-person, not videos, excuse me, in-person tours in 2021 with luck. And if you're a member, you'll receive notice of those meetings, and we'll hope you consider attending. If you're a member of the Oregon Tree Farm System, thank you for continuing to be a certified tree farm. Or if you're working towards becoming a certified tree farm, that's outstanding as well. I think that is everything I have. Feel free to copy any links or my email if you'd like to get some follow-up after this call. And enjoy your Saturdays, everyone. Thank you.